Sister Margaret's small room at St. Catherine's Convent looked out over a peaceful courtyard where birds came to drink from an old stone fountain. The room was simple, like everything else in her life. A narrow bed with white sheets, a wooden chair, a small desk, and a crucifix on the wall. That was all she needed, all she had wanted for the past 63 years. She was 84 now, her face mapped with wrinkles that told stories of a lifetime spent in service. Her hands, twisted slightly by arthritis, trembled when she held her morning tea. Those hands had done so much over the decades. They had held the hands of the dying, wiped tears from children's faces, prepared thousands of meals, and folded in prayer more times than she could count. But there was something else about those hands. Something most people at the convent didn't know. Something Sister Margaret had tucked away in a corner of her heart so long ago that sometimes even she forgot it was there. Those hands had once made music that could make grown men cry. Every morning, Sister Margaret woke before dawn. She would dress in her simple habit, the same style she had worn for decades, and make her way to the chapel for morning prayers. Her cane tapped softly against the stone floors, a rhythm she knew by heart. The younger sisters would smile at her as she passed, and she would nod, her eyes kind but quiet. After prayers came breakfast, then her duties. Sister Margaret worked in the convent's small library, organizing books and helping anyone who came looking for something to read. She moved slowly now, but she never complained. Complaining wasn't in her nature. She had chosen this life, and she had never once regretted it. Well, almost never. Sometimes late at night, when the convent was silent and still, Sister Margaret would lie in her narrow bed and remember. She would remember being 19 years old, sitting at a grand piano in front of a panel of stern-faced judges. She remembered how her fingers had flown across the keys, how the music had poured out of her like water from a spring. She remembered the letter that came 3 weeks later, the one with the Juilliard School seal on it. She had been accepted, full scholarship. Her teacher had cried with joy. Her mother had been so proud, but that was also the summer she had felt the call. Not the call to perform in concert halls or record albums or teach at prestigious universities. A different call. One that whispered to her during morning mass, one that grew stronger every time she prayed. A call to serve, to give her life to something bigger than applause and fame. Her mother hadn't understood at first. "You're throwing away your gift," she had said, tears in her eyes. "God gave you this talent. How can you walk away from it?" But young Margaret had smiled, taking her mother's hands. "I'm not walking away from God's gift, Mama. I'm giving it back to Him." That was 63 years ago. A lifetime ago. A different world ago. The old upright piano sat in the convent's recreation room, mostly forgotten except for when Sister Margaret dusted it every Thursday. It was out of tune, some keys stuck, and nobody really played it anymore. The younger sisters had their phones and their computers. Music came from speakers now, not from instruments. But sometimes, when everyone was busy elsewhere, Sister Margaret would sit at that old piano. Her twisted fingers would find the keys and she would play, not the difficult pieces she once knew by heart, not Chopin or Rachmaninoff or Beethoven, just simple hymns, just quiet melodies that no one heard except her and perhaps God. The arthritis made it painful. Her fingers didn't bend the way they used to. Sometimes a note would come out wrong, or she would have to stop because the pain was too sharp. But for those few minutes, she wasn't 84 years old. She wasn't Sister Margaret with her cane and her wrinkled hands. She was young again, and the music was everything. The younger sisters would sometimes pause outside the recreation room door, hearing the soft music drifting out. They would smile and move on, thinking it was sweet that the old nun played simple songs. They had no idea what those gnarled hands had once been capable of. They had no idea that Sister Margaret had turned down Juilliard, that she had once played in competitions, that renowned teachers had called her a prodigy. Sister Margaret never told them. It seemed like pride to talk about such things. Her old life, her old dreams, her old self, those belonged to the past. She had made her choice, and she had never looked back, or so she told herself. But lately, something had been stirring inside her. Maybe it was getting older, knowing that her time was getting shorter. Maybe it was the dreams that had started coming back. Dreams where she was young and playing to packed concert halls, where people stood and applauded until their hands hurt. Maybe it was simply that the music inside her, buried for so long, was trying to find its way out one last time. She would sit in chapel during evening prayers, and her fingers would twitch slightly, playing invisible keys. She would hear a hymn during Mass, and her mind would automatically arrange it into a more complex version, adding runs and flourishes that her hands could no longer execute. She would lie in bed, and melodies she hadn't thought of in decades would come flooding back, as clear as if she had played them yesterday. The other nuns noticed she seemed different lately. A bit more distant, a bit more thoughtful. Mother Superior, who had known Sister Margaret for 40 years, watched her with concern. One afternoon she found the elderly nun sitting in the garden staring at her hands. "What troubles you, sister?" Mother Superior asked gently. Sister Margaret looked up, startled. "Oh, nothing, Mother, just thinking about time. How fast it goes. How much we leave behind." Mother Superior sat beside her on the bench. "We leave behind what we must to follow our calling. But what we truly are, what God made us to be, that never leaves. It's always part of us." Sister Margaret nodded but said nothing more. How could she explain this feeling? This sense that maybe, just maybe, she had buried something that wasn't meant to stay buried forever. That perhaps giving up her music completely had been her choice, not God's requirement. That evening, as she made her way back to her small room, she paused outside the recreation room. The old piano sat there in the dim light, waiting. Sister Margaret looked around. The hallway was empty. Everyone was at evening prayers. She had a few minutes. She opened the door and went inside. Sitting at the piano, she placed her twisted fingers on the keys. And then, very softly, she began to play. Not a hymn this time. Something else. Something from long ago. A piece she had learned when she was 16. A piece she hadn't played in over 60 years. Her fingers stumbled at first, the arthritis making them clumsy. But slowly, muscle memory took over. The melody emerged, hesitant but real, and for just a moment Sister Margaret closed her eyes and let herself be 19 again. Let herself feel the music the way she once had. Let herself remember what it felt like to be fully alive at a piano. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she stood, using her cane for support, and left the room. She didn't know it then, but that moment, that small private moment, was the beginning of something. Something that would change not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. Sometimes God works in mysterious ways. Sometimes what we think we've left behind is actually just waiting for the right moment to return. And sometimes an old nun playing a forgotten piano is exactly where a miracle begins. Sister Margaret woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window, and the sound of excited voices in the hallway. For a moment she was disoriented, wondering what all the commotion was about. Then the memories of last night flooded back and she smiled. Her hands were stiff and sore, worse than they had been in months. She flexed her fingers slowly, wincing at the pain. It had been worth it, every ache and twinge. But she wondered if she would ever be able to play like that again, or if last night had been a one-time gift, a single moment of grace that couldn't be repeated. When she made her way to breakfast, leaning heavily on her cane, the entire dining hall erupted in applause. Sister Margaret stopped in the doorway, embarrassed and overwhelmed. The younger sisters rushed to help her to her seat, everyone talking at once. "You're famous. It's all over social media. Someone recorded it and posted the video online." Sister Margaret had no idea what social media was, but Sister Catherine pulled out her phone and showed her. There on the tiny screen was Sister Margaret at the piano playing the Chopin. The video had been viewed thousands of times already, and the number kept climbing as they watched. The comment section was flooded with responses, people from around the world sharing how the music had moved them, how they had cried, how it had inspired them. Some shared their own stories of hidden talents they had given up. Others talked about aging parents or grandparents, about seeing dignity and beauty in the elderly in a new way. Many simply said thank you over and over. "I don't understand," Sister Margaret said, staring at the phone. "How can people around the world see this?" "It was just last night," Sister Teresa laughed. "Welcome to the internet, sister. When something is this beautiful, this meaningful, it spreads like wildfire. People share it with their friends who share it with their friends. By this afternoon, millions of people will have seen you play." Sister Margaret felt dizzy at the thought. Millions of people. She had played for an audience of 300 and thought that was overwhelming. Now people everywhere, in countries she had never been to, languages she didn't speak, were hearing her music. The phone at the convent started ringing before breakfast was over. Mother Superior answered it, then returned with a strange expression on her face. That was a reporter from the local news station. They want to interview you. More calls followed throughout the morning. Newspapers, radio stations, television programs. Everyone wanted to talk to the 84-year-old nun who had played Chopin after 60 years away from performance. Everyone wanted to know her story. Sister Margaret retreated to her room, feeling overwhelmed. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She had just wanted to play one piece at a charity event, to finally share the gift that had been buried inside her for so long. She hadn't expected fame. She hadn't wanted attention. She just wanted to make music, but the attention kept coming. By afternoon, camera crews were showing up at the convent gate. Mother Superior had to speak to them, explaining that Sister Margaret needed rest and privacy. But she did agree to one interview, with a local reporter who had always been kind to the convent. The interview was simple and short. Sister Margaret sat in the garden, her hands folded in her lap, and answered questions about her life, her choice to enter the convent, what it had felt like to play again after so many years. "Do you regret the years you didn't play?" the reporter asked. It was the same question Mother Superior had asked. Sister Margaret gave the same answer, but it felt different saying it to a camera, knowing thousands or millions of people might hear it. "I don't regret my life of service, but I do regret thinking I had to give up music completely. I wish I had understood sooner that you can serve God and still use the gifts He gives you, that maybe the best service is sharing those gifts with others." What would you say to other people who have hidden their talents, who think it's too late to pursue their dreams? Sister Margaret looked directly into the camera. It's never too late. Your gifts don't have an expiration date, whether you're 30 or 50 or 84. If there's something inside you that wants to come out, let it. Don't wait. Don't think you're too old or too broken or too anything. Just try. The trying itself is beautiful. The interview aired that evening, and the video from the gala continued to spread. By the next day, Sister Margaret's performance had been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets around the world were picking up the story. Headlines appeared in languages she couldn't read, but the message was universal. An elderly nun had reminded the world that age, pain, and time cannot stop the human spirit. The letters started arriving. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They came from everywhere. An elderly man in Japan who had given up painting 40 years ago, but had picked up a brush again after seeing Sister Margaret play. A middle-aged woman in Brazil who had always wanted to learn guitar but thought she was too old, now taking her first lessons. A grandmother in Australia who had hidden her poetry for decades, now sharing it with her family. People sent their own stories, their own struggles, their own victories. They thanked Sister Margaret for giving them courage. They told her she had changed their lives. Some sent donations to the convent. Others simply sent love. Sister Margaret sat in the library, reading letter after letter, tears streaming down her face. She had no idea. No idea that one performance could touch so many people. No idea that her story would resonate across cultures and continents. No idea that her simple act of courage would inspire others to find their own. "It's too much," she told Mother Superior one afternoon, surrounded by unopened envelopes. "I don't know how to respond to all of this. I'm just one old woman. I played piano. That's all." Mother Superior sat beside her, picking up one of the letters. "You did more than play piano. You showed the world that our value doesn't decrease with age, that beauty can come from unlikely places, that it's never too late to be authentic." Those are powerful messages, sister. The world needed to hear them. As the days passed, the initial frenzy began to calm. The camera crews left. The flood of phone calls slowed to a trickle. But the letters kept coming. And so did the invitations. A concert hall in the city wanted her to perform. A recording studio offered to make an album. Television shows wanted her as a guest. Universities wanted her to speak. Music schools wanted her to teach. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a piece of Sister Margaret. She turned them all down, not out of false modesty or fear, but because she understood something important. That night at the gala had been special precisely because it was unexpected, unrehearsed, raw. It had meant something because it was authentic. Turning it into a career, into performances and recordings and appearances, would change what it was, would make it about something other than truth. "I'm not a professional musician," she told the disappointed callers. "I'm a nun who plays piano sometimes. That's all I want to be." But she did make one concession. Once a month she would give a small concert at the convent. Nothing fancy, nothing formal. Just Sister Margaret at the old upright piano in the recreation room, playing for whoever wanted to listen. Sometimes it was just the other sisters. Sometimes visitors came, people who had seen the video and wanted to hear her play in person. These monthly concerts became sacred events. Sister Margaret would play whatever her hands felt capable of that day. Sometimes it was the Chopin again. Sometimes other classical pieces from her youth, the ones her fingers could still remember. Sometimes just simple hymns when the arthritis was too bad for anything complex. And people listened like they were hearing something holy, because they were. Not just the music itself, but what it represented. The triumph of spirit over limitation. The refusal to let age or pain or time have the final word. The courage to share your authentic self with the world, no matter how scary that might be. Rebecca came to every concert, sitting in the front row, crying every time. Other people started showing up regularly too. Elderly folks who felt seen and valued. Young people inspired to pursue their own dreams. Anyone who needed a reminder that their gifts mattered, that they mattered, regardless of their age or circumstances. Between concerts, Sister Margaret returned to her normal life. She still worked in the library. She still attended prayers. She still lived in her small room with its narrow bed and simple furnishings. But something had changed in her. A lightness, a completeness. She had integrated the parts of herself she had kept separate for so long, and in doing so had become more fully who she was always meant to be. One afternoon, 3 months after the gala, a package arrived at the convent. It was from a man in Norway, a retired professor who had seen the video. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a letter. "Dear Sister Margaret," the letter began, "I am 78 years old. I was a literature professor for 40 years, but my true passion was always writing fiction. I wrote a novel when I was 30, but after it was rejected by publishers, I gave up. I told myself I was meant to be a teacher, not a writer. I buried my dream and convinced myself I was content. Then I saw you play piano. I saw your twisted hands making such beauty, and I thought, what excuse do I have? My hands work fine. I'm just scared. So I've started writing again, every day a little bit. It's hard and I'm rusty, but I'm doing it." The days after Sister Margaret agreed to perform felt like living in a dream and a nightmare at the same time. She would wake up each morning with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, then remember what she had committed to do, and the knot would tighten. But underneath the fear was something else. Something she hadn't felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was called. Excitement. Her first real practice session was humbling. She sat at the old upright piano in the recreation room, the hymn sheet propped up in front of her, and tried to play. Her fingers felt like wooden sticks, stiff and uncooperative. The arthritis in her knuckles sent sharp pains up through her hands with almost every note. She made it through the first verse, then had to stop, flexing her fingers and wincing. "This is impossible," she muttered to herself. "I'm fooling myself," but she tried again. And again. Each time her fingers remembered a little bit more. It was like trying to recall a language she hadn't spoken in decades. The words were there, buried deep in her memory, but getting them out required patience and persistence. Sister Teresa became her unofficial coach and biggest supporter. She would bring Sister Margaret tea during practice sessions, sit quietly in the corner, and offer encouragement whenever the elderly nun got frustrated. "You're getting better every day," Sister Teresa would say. "I can hear it. Yesterday that part was choppy, today it flows." "My hands hurt," Sister Margaret would reply. "I have to stop every few minutes, so we work with that. We find ways to manage the pain. You're not 19 anymore, and that's okay. You're bringing a lifetime of experience to this music. That counts for something." Sister Margaret appreciated the encouragement, but doubt gnawed at her constantly. She would lie in bed at night, her hands aching, wondering if she was being prideful. Was this about sharing God's gift, or was it about her ego? Was she trying to relive her youth? Was she doing this for the right reasons? She prayed about it every day, sometimes multiple times a day, and slowly something shifted inside her. She began to realize that the music itself was a form of prayer. When she played, even with her aching fingers and stumbling technique, she felt closer to God than she had in years. The notes became a conversation, a way of expressing things too deep for words. The younger sisters had caught wind of what was happening, and suddenly Sister Margaret had an audience for her practice sessions. They would find excuses to walk past the recreation room, then stop and listen. Some would quietly slip inside and sit on the old couch watching her practice. At first this made her nervous, but eventually she got used to it. "Why did you give up music?" Sister Catherine, one of the youngest nuns, asked one afternoon. "If you were this good, why walk away?" Sister Margaret's fingers paused on the keys. It was a question she had asked herself 1,000 times over the years. "I believed God was calling me to something else, and I don't regret that choice. But maybe I thought it had to be all or nothing. Music or faith. Performance or service. Now I'm old enough to wonder if that was the right way to think about it." "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe God gives us gifts not to bury them, but to use them in whatever way we can, for as long as we can. Maybe I was wrong to think I had to completely give up one thing to fully embrace another." It was a revelation that surprised even her. For 63 years she had believed her sacrifice was complete and necessary. But now, sitting at this old piano with her twisted hands finding their way back to the music, she wondered if God had been waiting all this time for her to realize that her gift didn't have to stay buried forever. The practices got longer. 30 minutes became an hour. An hour became 2. Her hands would throb afterward, and she would have to soak them in warm water, but it was worth it. The hymn was coming together. More than that, the music was waking something up inside her that had been sleeping for decades. One afternoon, about 5 days before the gala, something unexpected happened. She was practicing, lost in the music, when her fingers suddenly deviated from the simple hymn she had been working on. They found different notes, a different melody. Before she realized what she was doing, she was playing something from her past, a piece she hadn't touched in over 60 years. It was Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major. The piece she had prepared for her Juilliard audition. The piece she had played the last time before she entered the convent. The piece that represented everything she had given up. Her fingers stumbled over the notes. She couldn't remember all of it. The middle section was fuzzy, and the ending was completely gone from her memory. But even the fragments were beautiful, richer and more complex than the simple hymn she had been practicing. When she finally stopped, breathing hard, she looked up to find Mother Superior standing in the doorway. "How long have you been there?" Sister Margaret asked, embarrassed. "Long enough," Mother Superior said, coming into the room. "That wasn't a hymn. No, I'm sorry. My fingers they went somewhere else. Somewhere I haven't been in a very long time." Mother Superior sat down on the couch. "What was it?" "Chopin, a nocturne. It was the piece I was going to play for my Juilliard audition." Sister Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "I can't even remember all of it anymore." "But your fingers do. At least some of it." "Muscle memory is a powerful thing." Sister Margaret looked down at her gnarled hands. "For a moment there, I felt young again. I felt like the girl I was before. Before all this." She gestured at her habit, the convent walls around them. "And did that feel good?" It was a dangerous question. Sister Margaret thought about it carefully before answering. "It felt like finding a part of myself I thought was gone forever. And yes, that felt good. But it also made me sad. For all the years I didn't play. For all the music I kept locked inside." Mother Superior nodded slowly. "You know, when I asked you to perform at the gala, I had a feeling this might happen. Not the Chopin specifically, but something. Sometimes we need an excuse to reconnect with the parts of ourselves we've hidden away. I shouldn't have hidden it. Should I? You did what you thought was right at the time, we all do. But we're allowed to grow, to change our understanding. God is bigger than our small boxes and categories. You can be a devoted servant of God and still make music. In fact, maybe that's exactly what God wants from you." The conversation stayed with Sister Margaret for days. She continued practicing the hymn, but now she would also spend time with the Chopin, trying to remember the parts that had faded. Some sections came back quickly. Others remained frustratingly out of reach. But slowly, piece by piece, the nocturne was reassembling itself in her fingers. She didn't tell anyone about the Chopin. The hymn was what she had committed to perform, and that's what she would do. The Chopin was just for her, a private conversation with her younger self, a way of saying hello to the girl she had been before she became Sister Margaret. 2 days before the gala, her hand seized up completely during practice. The arthritis flared so badly she couldn't even make a fist. Sister Teresa found her in her room, tears streaming down her face, trying to force her fingers to bend. "I can't do this," Sister Margaret sobbed. "I was foolish to think I could. These hands are too old, too broken. I should never have agreed. Sister Teresa knelt beside her, taking the old woman's twisted hands in her own young, smooth ones. Listen to me. You are going to go out there and play. Maybe your hands won't cooperate perfectly. Maybe you'll miss some notes. But you're going to do it anyway because this isn't about perfection. It's about courage. It's about showing everyone that it's never too late, that our gifts don't expire, that age and pain and time don't have the final word. What if I fail? What if you succeed? What if you get out there and your hands remember what your mind has forgotten? What if that music pours out of you the way it was meant to all along? What if this is exactly what you're supposed to do? Sister Margaret looked into the young nun's earnest face and saw such faith there, such belief. She took a shaky breath. Okay, I'll try. That's all I can promise. I'll try. The day of the gala arrived. Sister Margaret spent the morning in prayer, then soaked her hands in warm water for an hour, trying to loosen the joints. She practiced one last time that afternoon, the hymn coming out clear and true, her fingers cooperating better than they had in days. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe she could do this. Maybe for just 3 minutes she could be a pianist again, sharing the gift that God had given her so long ago. She dressed carefully, pinned her habit just right, and picked up her cane. Sister Teresa met her at the door. Ready? Sister Margaret took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. They walked together to the cathedral hall, where 300 people were gathering, where a beautiful grand piano waited on a bright stage, where Sister Margaret would face her past and her future at the same time. She didn't know yet that this night would change everything. She didn't know that the simple hymn she had practiced so carefully would never make it out of her fingers. She didn't know that what was about to happen would touch hearts around the world. All she knew was that she was scared and excited and more alive than she had felt in 63 years. And that would have to be enough. The cathedral hall was more magnificent than Sister Margaret remembered from the setup day. With all the lights on, the chandeliers sparkling and people filling the space, it transformed from an empty venue into something magical. The high arched ceilings seemed to reach toward heaven itself. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Tall windows let in the last rays of evening sunlight, painting everything in warm gold. Sister Margaret stood near the entrance, her cane in one hand, the other gripping Sister Teresa's arm for support. Her legs felt weak and her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone around her could hear it. You can do this, Sister Teresa whispered. Just breathe, but breathing felt difficult. Sister Margaret watched as people streamed through the doors. Women in elegant evening gowns, men in sharp suits, everyone dressed like they were attending something important. And they were. This wasn't just any gathering. This was the social event of the season for the diocese, a chance for the wealthy and influential to show their support while enjoying an evening of culture and fine dining. She felt completely out of place. An old nun with a cane, wearing a simple habit that had been mended several times over the years, preparing to perform alongside trained musicians. What had she been thinking? What had Mother Superior been thinking? Come on, Sister Teresa said gently. Let's get you backstage. You need to rest before your performance. The backstage area was chaos. People rushed back and forth with clipboards and headsets. The performers were warming up, the noise creating a confusing blend of sounds. A violin playing scales, a woman singing voice exercises, the choir mumbling through their harmonies, a man testing the microphone, his voice booming, testing 1, 2, 3 over and over. Sister Margaret found a folding chair in a corner and sat down carefully, her hands already trembling. Not from the arthritis this time, but from pure nerves. She looked at her twisted fingers, wondering if they would cooperate when the moment came. All those hours of practice might mean nothing if her hands froze up on stage. The teenage violinist, a boy of about 16 with nervous eyes and messy hair, sat down in the chair next to her. He held his violin case on his lap, his knee bouncing up and down with anxiety. First time performing at something like this? Sister Margaret asked him kindly. He nodded. Yeah, I've played at school concerts and stuff, but nothing this big. There are so many people out there. Important people. What if I mess up? Sister Margaret smiled, finding it oddly comforting to meet someone more nervous than she was. Then you mess up. You're human. They'll forgive you. Are you performing too? He asked, seeming to notice her for the first time. I'm playing piano, just a simple hymn. Are you nervous? Sister Margaret laughed, a short, genuine laugh. Terrified. I haven't performed in front of people in over 60 years. His eyes widened. 60 years? Why so long? Life took me in a different direction. But here I am getting a second chance. So if I can do this at 84, you can definitely do this at 16. He smiled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Thanks. Good luck out there. You too, young man. Through a gap in the curtain, Sister Margaret could see the hall filling up. The seats were nearly all taken now. She spotted Mother Superior in the front row, surrounded by other nuns from the convent. She saw community leaders, business owners, people who had donated generously to the church over the years. 300 people, maybe more, all of them expecting a polished evening of entertainment. The lights dimmed and the crowd settled into their seats. The master of ceremonies, a local news anchor volunteering his time for the cause, stepped onto the stage. He was polished and professional, his voice smooth as silk. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's charity gala benefiting our local churches and convents. Your generosity tonight will help repair roofs, fix heating systems, and maintain the sacred spaces that serve our community. We have a wonderful program planned for you this evening, featuring some of our area's finest musical talent. The applause was enthusiastic. The crowd was in a good mood, ready to be entertained and feel good about their charitable contributions. The young violinist was up first. Sister Margaret watched from the wings as he walked onto the stage, his violin tucked under his arm. He looked so small under those bright lights, so vulnerable. He raised his violin, took a breath, and began to play. It was beautiful. The piece was technically challenging, something by Vivaldi if Sister Margaret remembered correctly, and the boy played it with passion and skill. A few notes wavered, one section was slightly rushed, but overall it was an impressive performance. The audience erupted in applause when he finished, and he walked off stage with a huge smile on his face. You did great, Sister Margaret told him as he passed. Thanks. Your turn soon. Break a leg. The choir was next. 40 voices strong, they filled the hall with rich, powerful sound. They sang two spirituals, their harmonies tight and moving. The audience loved it. More enthusiastic applause, some people even standing. Then came the opera singer, a woman in her 40s with a stunning red dress and a voice that could probably shatter glass. She sang an aria from some Italian opera, her voice soaring and diving with incredible control. It was the kind of performance that reminded everyone in the room why opera had survived for centuries. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Sister Margaret's stomach dropped. How could she follow that? These were real performers, people with training and experience and voices and instruments that still worked properly. She was an old woman with arthritic hands playing a simple hymn. She actually stood up, ready to find someone to tell them she couldn't do this. But before she could move, the MC's voice rang out over the microphone. And now, we have a very special performer. She has devoted her life to serving God and our community for over 6 decades at St. Catherine's Convent. She's a woman of deep faith, quiet service, and as we're about to discover, hidden talents. Please welcome Sister Margaret. The applause started, polite and warm, but not particularly enthusiastic. Most people in the audience didn't know who she was. To them, she was probably just another religious sister, perhaps doing a reading or offering a blessing. Sister Margaret gripped her cane and stood up. Her legs felt like jelly. Sister Teresa appeared at her side. You've got this, the younger nun whispered. I believe in you. Sister Margaret took a step toward the stage. Then another. The bright lights were blinding. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her as she made her slow way across the stage, her cane tapping against the polished wood. It felt like the longest walk of her life. She could hear whispers from the audience, confused murmurs, people probably wondering what an elderly nun with a cane was going to do. Sing? Speak? Surely not perform. The beautiful grand piano sat in the center of the stage, gleaming under the lights. It was so much nicer than the beaten-up upright she had practiced on. Bigger, more imposing, more real. Sister Margaret reached it and stood there for a moment, overwhelmed. A young man in a suit hurried over to help her. He adjusted the piano bench, making sure it was at the right height. He took her cane and set it carefully to the side. He offered his arm to help her sit down. She accepted gratefully, lowering herself onto the bench with a quiet grunt of effort. The audience had gone quiet now, watching this elderly woman prepare to play. Some looked skeptical. Some looked curious. Some looked like they were checking their watches, wondering how long this would take. Sister Margaret positioned her hands over the keys. Her fingers trembled slightly. The arthritis pain was there, a dull ache in every joint. But underneath that was something else, a feeling she hadn't experienced in decades. The electric anticipation of performance, the moment before the music begins, when anything is possible. She took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and was about to play the first note of her carefully practiced hymn, when a woman in a business suit appeared at the edge of the stage, walking quickly toward the MC. The woman looked stressed, urgent, like something was wrong. Sister Margaret's hands froze above the keys. The woman was whispering to the MC, gesturing at her watch. The microphone wasn't quite off, and fragments of the conversation carried to the front rows. We're running behind schedule. Need to skip something. The mayor has to leave early. The MC nodded, looking uncomfortable. Then he and the woman both turned to look at Sister Margaret. Still sitting at the piano, her hands suspended in midair, her heart sinking as she realized what was about to happen. The woman walked toward her, a practiced smile on her face but determination in her eyes. She reached Sister Margaret and bent down, speaking quietly but firmly. "I'm so sorry, sister, but we're running behind schedule tonight. Important guests need to leave early, and we really need to keep things moving. Perhaps it would be better if we skipped your performance this time. We can always reschedule for another event." The words hit Sister Margaret like physical blows. Skipped, reschedule, another event. Polite words that all meant the same thing. You're not important enough. Your music doesn't matter. We need to make room for more important things. And maybe, Sister Margaret thought, maybe they were right. Maybe this had been a foolish idea from the start. An old woman's vanity, thinking she still had something to offer. Sister Margaret had made it 3 steps away from the piano, her cane tapping against the stage floor, when the voice rang out from somewhere in the middle of the hall. "Wait, please let her play." The entire hall fell silent. Every head turned to see who had spoken. Even Sister Margaret stopped, her heart hammering in her chest, afraid to hope. A young woman was standing in the audience, her hands gripping the seat in front of her. She looked to be in her mid-20s, dressed simply in a modest dress, her dark hair pulled back. Her face was flushed, as if she couldn't quite believe she had just shouted in a room full of hundreds of people. But her eyes were fierce, determined. The woman in the business suit on stage looked annoyed. "Miss, please sit down. We have a schedule to maintain." 3 minutes, the young woman called out, her voice shaking but strong. "That's all she needs. Surely we can spare 3 minutes. I understand, but no, you don't understand." The young woman's voice grew stronger. "That's Sister Margaret. Do you know who she is? What she's done for people?" The hall was absolutely silent now. The woman in the business suit looked uncomfortable. The MC stood frozen, microphone in hand, clearly unsure how to handle this disruption. And Sister Margaret stood there, halfway between the piano and the edge of the stage, torn between hope and humiliation. The young woman took a breath and continued, speaking to the entire hall now. 6 months ago, I wanted to die. I had lost my job, my apartment, everything. I was ready to end it all. I went to St. Catherine's Convent because I didn't know where else to go, and Sister Margaret took me in. She gave me tea. She listened to me cry for 2 hours without saying a word. And then she played piano for me. Sister Margaret's eyes widened. She recognized the young woman now. Her name was Rebecca. She had come to the convent on a cold March afternoon, shaking and pale, barely holding herself together. Sister Margaret remembered making her chamomile tea, remembered the girl's tears, remembered feeling completely inadequate to help someone in such deep pain. Rebecca's voice trembled as she continued. "She played this beautiful piece. I don't even know what it was. Some classical thing. But it was like she was playing my pain and my hope and everything I couldn't put into words. When she finished, I could breathe again. I could see a reason to keep going. She played piano for me every week after that, and every time the music helped me find my way back to myself." Tears were streaming down Rebecca's face now, but she didn't wipe them away. She looked directly at the woman in the business suit. "Sister Margaret saved my life with her music. The least we can do is give her 3 minutes to share it with all of you. The least we can do is show her the same grace she showed me." The hall erupted, not in applause but in voices. People calling out agreement. Others standing up. A man in an expensive suit near the front rose to his feet. "Let her play," he said firmly. I came here to support the church and I want to hear what this woman has to offer. An older woman stood next. This is ridiculous. We can't just skip people because we're running behind. That's not what this night is about. More people stood. More voices joined in. The woman in the business suit looked panicked, realizing she had badly miscalculated. The MC looked to her, to the crowd, to Sister Margaret clearly out of his depth. And then Mother Superior stood up from the front row. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of authority and compassion. Sister Margaret has given 63 years of her life in service to our community. She has asked for nothing in return, expects nothing, wants nothing but to serve. If she has found the courage at 84 years old to share her gift with us, then we have the grace to listen. She will perform. The hall erupted in applause, real applause this time, not the polite, obligatory kind, but genuine support. The woman in the business suit, defeated and embarrassed, retreated to the side of the stage. The MC, looking relieved to have a clear direction, stepped back to his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Sister Margaret will perform. The applause grew louder. People who had been ready to dismiss her minutes ago were now invested in her success. They wanted to see what this old nun could do, wanted to understand why that young woman had stood up and fought for her, wanted to witness whatever had saved Rebecca's life. Sister Margaret stood frozen, overwhelmed. Her hands were shaking worse than ever. The pressure was enormous now. It wasn't just about playing a simple hymn anymore. People expected something special, something worth fighting for, something that could save lives. Sister Teresa appeared at her side, having rushed onto the stage from the wings. "You can do this," she whispered, guiding Sister Margaret back toward the piano. "Don't think about all of them. Just play. Play like you did for Rebecca. Play like you do in the recreation room when you think no one's listening. Just play." Sister Margaret nodded, unable to speak. She made her way back to the piano bench, her legs barely supporting her. Someone helped her sit down again. The audience settled into silence, but it was different this time. Expectant, hopeful, supportive. She looked down at her twisted hands, at the keys gleaming under the stage lights. She thought about the simple hymn she had practiced so carefully. The safe choice. The easy choice. The choice that wouldn't embarrass her or disappoint anyone. But she also thought about Rebecca's words. About playing her pain and hope. About music that had helped a desperate young woman find her way back to life. That wasn't a simple hymn. That was something deeper, something that had come from a place inside her she thought she had closed off forever. Her fingers found the keys. Her hands settled into position. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. She had spent 63 years trying to be small, quiet, unobtrusive, trying to serve without being seen, to help without being noticed. She had buried her music, her passion, her gift, thinking that was what God wanted from her. But maybe Rebecca was right. Maybe that young woman standing up and fighting for her was a sign. Maybe the music wasn't something to hide, but something to share. Maybe this moment, right here, right now, was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sister Margaret closed her eyes and let her hands remember. Not the hymn, not the safe choice. Her fingers began to move, and the first notes that came out weren't from her careful practice sessions. They were from 63 years ago. They were from the girl she had been before she became Sister Margaret. They were from the deepest part of her soul, the part that had never really forgotten what it meant to make music that mattered. She was playing Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat major, the piece she had prepared for her Juilliard audition, the piece that represented everything she had given up, the piece she hadn't played in full for anyone since she was 19 years old. The first notes were tentative, uncertain. Her arthritis made her fingers stumble. The muscle memory was incomplete, foggy. But then something extraordinary happened. Her hands began to remember what her mind had forgotten. The notes started to flow. The melody emerged, hesitant at first, then growing stronger, more confident. It wasn't perfect. Her fingers missed notes here and there. The arthritis caused occasional delays, brief pauses where her hands had to catch up to where they wanted to be. But none of that mattered. What poured out of that piano wasn't technical perfection. It was truth. It was a lifetime of prayer and service and sacrifice and hidden dreams. It was 63 years of music locked inside an old woman's heart, finally being set free. The hall was absolutely silent. 300 people sat motionless, barely breathing as Sister Margaret played. Some had their mouths open slightly in shock. Others had tears already forming in their eyes. Rebecca sat with her hands pressed to her chest, crying openly. Sister Margaret kept playing, lost in the music now. The pain in her hands faded away. The stage, the lights, the audience, all of it disappeared. There was only the piano and the music and the strange, wonderful feeling of being completely herself for the first time in decades. The nocturne unfolded, each phrase more beautiful than the last. The middle section came back to her, the notes she thought she had forgotten flowing out as if she had played them yesterday. Her fingers found the complex runs, the delicate harmonies, the moments of quiet tenderness followed by passionate declarations. This wasn't just music. This was her life story told in notes and chords. This was every tear she had wiped away, every hand she had held, every prayer she had whispered. This was the girl who had dreamed of concert halls and the woman who had chosen service. This was sacrifice and redemption, loss and discovery, age and youth all woven together. As she moved into the final section of the piece, Sister Margaret felt something break open inside her. All the walls she had built, all the parts of herself she had tried to bury, all the music she had kept locked away, it was all coming out now, pouring through her fingers into this instrument, filling this hall with something holy. The last notes fell like gentle rain, soft, tender, final. Sister Margaret's hands lifted from the keys and came to rest in her lap. She opened her eyes, suddenly aware again of where she was. The stage, the lights, the hundreds of people, and then she saw their faces. Everyone was crying. Not just a few people, but everyone. Men in expensive suits with tears running down their cheeks. Women dabbing at their eyes with tissues. The standing ovation lasted for what felt like forever. Sister Margaret sat at the piano, overwhelmed, unsure what to do. She had never experienced anything like this. Even in her youth, even when she performed in competitions, the response had never been like this. This wasn't just appreciation for technical skill. This was something deeper. People were applauding not just the music, but what it represented. Hope, courage, the triumph of the human spirit over time and pain and limitation. Finally, the young man who had helped her sit down returned to help her stand. Sister Margaret gripped his arm, her legs shaky, and rose from the bench. The applause somehow grew even louder. She turned to face the audience, blinking in the bright lights, and saw a sea of standing people, all of them clapping, many still crying. She didn't know what to do. Should she bow, wave? She settled for a small, humble nod, then reached for her cane. Sister Teresa rushed onto the stage to walk her off. And as they made their way slowly across the stage, the applause followed them all the way to the wings. The moment they were backstage, Sister Margaret's legs gave out. Sister Teresa and two other helpers caught her and gently lowered her into a chair. Her whole body was shaking, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming rush of emotion. "You did it," Sister Teresa kept saying, her voice choked with tears. "You actually did it. I don't have words. That was incredible." The other performers gathered around. The teenage violinist was there, his eyes red from crying. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he said. "I've been playing violin since I was 6, and I've never felt music like that." The opera singer approached, still dabbing at her eyes. 60 years you didn't play? How is that even possible? That gift, you can't hide that. It's too big. Too important. People kept coming. Members of the event committee, apologizing profusely for trying to cut her performance. Random audience members who had made their way backstage just to meet her, to thank her, to tell her what the music had meant to them. It was overwhelming, and Sister Margaret, who had spent 63 years avoiding attention, didn't know how to handle any of it. Mother Superior finally pushed through the crowd. "That's enough," she said firmly but kindly. "Sister Margaret needs rest. She's 84 years old and just gave the performance of a lifetime. Give her some space." They helped Sister Margaret to a quiet room away from the chaos. Mother Superior sat with her, holding a glass of water while the elderly nun's hand shook too much to hold it herself. "Why did you change the piece?" Mother Superior asked gently. "You practiced that hymn for weeks." Sister Margaret shook her head, still trying to process what had happened. "I don't know. When I sat down at the piano, when Rebecca stood up for me like that, when everyone started fighting for me to perform, I couldn't play something safe. It felt like lying. So I played the truth. I played who I really am. And who are you? Sister Margaret looked at her twisted hands. I think I'm both. The devoted nun and the passionate musician. The servant and the artist. I thought I had to choose, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can be both. Maybe I always was both. Mother Superior smiled, tears in her eyes. Maybe that's the real miracle tonight. Not the music, though that was miraculous. But you finding yourself again, all of yourself. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The gala continued, but nothing could match what Sister Margaret had done. The other planned performances felt almost unnecessary. People kept talking about the old nun at the piano, about her twisted fingers making such beautiful music, about how she had proven that age and limitation couldn't stop real talent, real passion, real truth. When it was time for the speeches and the auction, the MC couldn't help but reference Sister Margaret's performance. If that doesn't inspire you to open your wallets tonight, I don't know what will, he said. And people laughed and applauded and reached for their checkbooks with more enthusiasm than the organizers had dared hope for. Rebecca found Sister Margaret before the night ended. The young woman was still crying, her makeup ruined, but her face glowed with joy. She knelt beside Sister Margaret's chair and took the old nun's hands in hers. "Thank you," Rebecca whispered. "Thank you for not giving up, for finding the courage to play, for showing me and everyone here that it's never too late, that we're never too broken, that our gifts matter no matter how old we are or how much we've suffered." Sister Margaret squeezed her hands, her own eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for standing up for me. I was ready to walk away. You gave me the courage to stay. You gave me my life back," Rebecca said simply. "This was the least I could do." As Rebecca walked away, Sister Margaret thought about the mystery of how life works, how we touch each other in ways we can't predict or control, how a simple act of kindness, making tea, playing piano for a desperate young woman, can ripple out in ways we never imagine. How being saved and saving others are often the same thing. The sisters from St. Catherine's surrounded her as the evening wound down, all of them talking at once, hugging her, crying, laughing. They were so proud, so amazed. They had known Sister Margaret for years, decades some of them, and had no idea she could do what they had just witnessed. "You have to play for us," Sister Catherine insisted, "at the convent. Regular concerts. You can't hide this anymore." "My hands hurt too much to play regularly," Sister Margaret protested, but she was smiling. "Tonight was special. I don't know if I can do it again." "Then we'll make every time special," Sister Teresa said. "Once a month. Once every 2 months. Whatever you can handle. But please keep playing. The world needs your music." The drive back to the convent was quiet. Sister Margaret sat in the van with Mother Superior and Sister Teresa, watching the city lights pass by the window. Her hands ached terribly now, the arthritis flaring up after being pushed so hard. But it was a good ache. An earned ache. The ache of having done something that mattered. "Do you regret it?" Mother Superior asked softly. "The years you didn't play?" Sister Margaret thought about it carefully. "I don't regret my choice to serve God. I don't regret my life here. But I think I regret the false choice I made, thinking I had to completely give up music to be a good nun. I wish I had known sooner that I could do both. That serving God could include sharing the gifts He gave me." "You know now," Mother Superior said, "and you have time still. However much or little, you have time to use your gift." When they arrived back at the convent, Sister Margaret expected to simply go to her room and collapse into bed. But the other sisters had stayed up waiting for them. They had prepared hot tea and cookies, and they all wanted to hear everything, every detail, every moment of the evening. Sister Margaret sat in the common room, surrounded by her sisters, and told the story. How nervous she had been, how the woman had tried to stop her from performing, how Rebecca had stood up and fought for her, how her hands had found the Chopin instead of the hymn, how the music had poured out of her like it had been waiting 63 years for exactly that moment. They listened, enraptured, asking questions, marveling at every detail. And Sister Margaret realized something. This was family. These women, young and old, who had chosen the same life of service she had, they were celebrating her victory like it was their own. Her joy was their joy. Her triumph was their triumph. Finally, exhausted beyond measure, Sister Margaret excused herself and made her way to her small room. She changed into her nightgown, said her evening prayers, and climbed into her narrow bed. Her hands throbbed with pain. but her heart felt lighter than it had in decades. She thought about Rebecca, about that desperate young woman who had come to the convent 6 months ago, ready to end her life. She thought about how a simple act, making tea, playing piano, had helped save her. And then how Rebecca in turn had saved Sister Margaret tonight by standing up and insisting she perform. We save each other, Sister Margaret thought as sleep began to claim her. We're all connected in ways we can't see. Every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every gift shared, it all matters. It all ripples out. It all comes back around. Her last thought before falling asleep was about her mother, dead now for 30 years. The woman who had cried when her daughter turned down Juilliard, who had worried her daughter was throwing away her gift. Sister Margaret imagined her mother watching from heaven tonight, finally understanding. Finally seeing that her daughter hadn't thrown anything away. She had just been waiting for the right moment. Waiting for when the music would mean the most. Waiting for when sharing her gift would do the most good. I hope you're proud, Mama, Sister Margaret whispered into the darkness.
I hope you saw me tonight.
I hope you know I didn't waste your sacrifice, all those piano lessons, all those hours you spent driving me to teachers and competitions. It was all leading to this, to tonight, to finally becoming all of who I was meant to be. And somewhere in whatever place the dead go to watch over the living, perhaps her mother smiled. Perhaps she had been waiting all this time too. Waiting for her daughter to realize that grace doesn't require us to be less than we are. That God's gifts are meant to be used, not buried. That it's never ever too late to play the music in your heart. Sister Margaret woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window, and the sound of excited voices in the hallway. For a moment she was disoriented, wondering what all the commotion was about. Then the memories of last night flooded back and she smiled. Her hands were stiff and sore, worse than they had been in months. She flexed her fingers slowly, wincing at the pain. It had been worth it, every ache and twinge. But she wondered if she would ever be able to play like that again, or if last night had been a one-time gift. A single moment of grace that couldn't be repeated. When she made her way to breakfast, leaning heavily on her cane, the entire dining hall erupted in applause. Sister Margaret stopped in the doorway, embarrassed and overwhelmed. The younger sisters rushed to help her to her seat, everyone talking at once. You're famous. It's all over social media. Someone recorded it and posted the video online. Sister Margaret had no idea what social media was, but Sister Catherine pulled out her phone and showed her. There on the tiny screen was Sister Margaret at the piano playing the Chopin. The video had been viewed thousands of times already, and the number kept climbing as they watched. The comment section was flooded with responses. People from around the world sharing how the music had moved them, how they had cried, how it had inspired them. Some shared their own stories of hidden talents they had given up. Others talked about aging parents or grandparents, about seeing dignity and beauty in the elderly in a new way. Many simply said thank you over and over. I don't understand, Sister Margaret said, staring at the phone. How can people around the world see this? It was just last night, Sister Teresa laughed. Welcome to the internet, sister. When something is this beautiful, this meaningful, it spreads like wildfire. People share it with their friends, who share it with their friends. By this afternoon, millions of people will have seen you play. Sister Margaret felt dizzy at the thought. Millions of people. She had played for an audience of 300 and thought that was overwhelming. Now people everywhere, in countries she had never been to, languages she didn't speak, were hearing her music. The phone at the convent started ringing before breakfast was over. Mother Superior answered it, then returned with a strange expression on her face. That was a reporter from the local news station. They want to interview you. More calls followed throughout the morning. Newspapers, radio stations, television programs. Everyone wanted to talk to the 84-year-old nun who had played Chopin after 60 years away from performance. Everyone wanted to know her story. Sister Margaret retreated to her room feeling overwhelmed. This wasn't what she had signed up for. She had just wanted to play one piece at a charity event, to finally share the gift that had been buried inside her for so long. She hadn't expected fame. She hadn't wanted attention. She just wanted to make music, but the attention kept coming. By afternoon, camera crews were showing up at the convent gate. Mother Superior had to speak to them, explaining that Sister Margaret needed rest and privacy. But she did agree to one interview, with a local reporter who had always been kind to the convent. The interview was simple and short. Sister Margaret sat in the garden, her hands folded in her lap, and answered questions about her life, her choice to enter the convent, what it had felt like to play again after so many years. "Do you regret the years you didn't play?" the reporter asked. It was the same question Mother Superior had asked. Sister Margaret gave the same answer, but it felt different saying it to a camera, knowing thousands or millions of people might hear it. "I don't regret my life of service, but I do regret thinking I had to give up music completely. I wish I had understood sooner that you can serve God and still use the gifts He gives you, that maybe the best service is sharing those gifts with others. What would you say to other people who have hidden their talents, who think it's too late to pursue their dreams?" Sister Margaret looked directly into the camera. "It's never too late. Your gifts don't have an expiration date. Whether you're 30 or 50 or 84, if there's something inside you that wants to come out, let it. Don't wait. Don't think you're too old or too broken or too anything. Just try." The trying itself is beautiful. The interview aired that evening, and the video from the gala continued to spread. By the next day, Sister Margaret's performance had been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets around the world were picking up the story. Headlines appeared in languages she couldn't read, but the message was universal. An elderly nun had reminded the world that age, pain, and time cannot stop the human spirit. The letters started arriving. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They came from everywhere. An elderly man in Japan who had given up painting 40 years ago but had picked up a brush again after seeing Sister Margaret play. A middle-aged woman in Brazil who had always wanted to learn guitar but thought she was too old, now taking her first lessons. A grandmother in Australia who had hidden her poetry for decades, now sharing it with her family. People sent their own stories, their own struggles, their own victories. They thanked Sister Margaret for giving them courage. They told her she had changed their lives. Some sent donations to the convent. Others simply sent love. Sister Margaret sat in the library reading letter after letter, tears streaming down her face. She had no idea that one performance could touch so many people, no idea that her story would resonate across cultures and continents, no idea that her simple act of courage would inspire others to find their own. "It's too much," she told Mother Superior one afternoon, surrounded by unopened envelopes. "I don't know how to respond to all of this. I'm just one old woman. I played piano. That's all." Mother Superior sat beside her, picking up one of the letters. "You did more than play piano. You showed the world that our value doesn't decrease with age, that beauty can come from unlikely places, that it's never too late to be authentic. Those are powerful messages, sister. The world needed to hear them." As the days passed, the initial frenzy began to calm. The camera crews left. The flood of phone calls slowed to a trickle. But the letters kept coming, and so did the invitations. A concert hall in the city wanted her to perform. A recording studio offered to make an album. Television shows wanted her as a guest. Universities wanted her to speak. Music schools wanted her to teach. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a piece of Sister Margaret. She turned them all down, not out of false modesty or fear, but because she understood something important. That night at the gala had been special precisely because it was unexpected, unrehearsed, raw. It had meant something because it was authentic. Turning it into a career, into performances and recordings and appearances, would change what it was. Would make it about something other than truth. "I'm not a professional musician," she told the disappointed callers. "I'm a nun who plays piano sometimes. That's all I want to be." But she did make one concession. Once a month she would give a small concert at the convent. Nothing fancy, nothing formal. Just Sister Margaret at the old upright piano in the recreation room, playing for whoever wanted to listen. Sometimes it was just the other sisters. Sometimes visitors came, people who had seen the video and wanted to hear her play in person. These monthly concerts became sacred events. Sister Margaret would play whatever her hands felt capable of that day. Sometimes it was the Chopin again. Sometimes other classical pieces from her youth, the ones her fingers could still remember. Sometimes just simple hymns when the arthritis was too bad for anything complex. And people listened like they were hearing something holy, because they were. Not just the music itself, but what it represented. The triumph of spirit over limitation. The refusal to let age or pain or time have the final word. The courage to share your authentic self with the world, no matter how scary that might be. Rebecca came to every concert, sitting in the front row, crying every time. Other people started showing up regularly too. Elderly folks who felt seen and valued. Young people inspired to pursue their own dreams. anyone who needed a reminder that their gifts mattered, that they mattered, regardless of their age or circumstances. Between concerts, Sister Margaret returned to her normal life. She still worked in the library. She still attended prayers. She still lived in her small room with its narrow bed and simple furnishings, but something had changed in her. A lightness, a completeness. She had integrated the parts of herself she had kept separate for so long, and in doing so had become more fully who she was always meant to be. One afternoon, 3 months after the gala, a package arrived at the convent. It was from a man in Norway, a retired professor who had seen the video. Inside was a beautiful leather-bound journal and a letter. "Dear Sister Margaret," the letter began. "I am 78 years old. I was a literature professor for 40 years, but my true passion was always writing fiction. I wrote a novel when I was 30, but after it was rejected by publishers, I gave up. I told myself I was meant to be a teacher, not a writer. I buried my dream and convinced myself I was content. Then I saw you play piano. I saw your twisted hands making such beauty, and I thought, what excuse do I have? My hands work fine. I'm just scared. So I've started writing again. Every day a little bit. It's hard and I'm rusty, but I'm doing it." 2 years had passed since that night at the gala, and Sister Margaret was now 86 years old. Her body had grown weaker, her hands more painful, but her spirit had never been stronger. The monthly concerts continued, though sometimes she could only play for 10 or 15 minutes before the arthritis forced her to stop. But those brief moments of music remained powerful, sacred, transformative. The documentary about her life had aired on television and streaming platforms worldwide. It had been translated into dozens of languages. Schools showed it to students. Retirement homes played it for residents. Churches used it in sermons about finding purpose at any age. The message continued to spread, touching new lives every day. Sister Margaret's journal had grown thick with entries. Mother Superior suggested she might consider publishing it, letting others read her reflections on faith and music, service and authenticity. Sister Margaret resisted at first, but eventually agreed. The royalties, she insisted, would go entirely to charitable causes. The book, titled Hidden Songs: Finding Your Voice at Any Age, was published on a quiet Tuesday morning. Neither Sister Margaret nor the publisher expected much from it. But within weeks it had climbed bestseller lists. People connected with her honest reflections about regret and redemption, about the false choices we make, and the integration we seek. Readers wrote to tell her how the book had changed them. A 60-year-old woman started the photography business she had always dreamed of. A 75-year-old man returned to college to finish the degree he had abandoned 50 years earlier. A 50-year-old mother began painting again after decades away from her easel. Story after story of people reclaiming their gifts, pursuing their dreams, refusing to accept that it was too late. "I don't understand how this happened," Sister Margaret said to Mother Superior one morning, looking at another stack of letters. "I'm nobody special. I'm just an old nun who plays piano sometimes." Mother Superior smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You're exactly who the world needed. Not a young prodigy with perfect technique, not a famous performer with a flawless career, but a real person who struggled and sacrificed and buried her gifts, then found the courage to reclaim them. That's the story people need. That's the story that gives hope." The monthly concerts had evolved into something more than just performances. They had become gatherings of a community united by a common message. People traveled from across the country to attend. Some came once. Others came every month, making it a pilgrimage of sorts. The audiences were diverse. Elderly people finding validation and hope. Young people learning that age doesn't diminish worth. Musicians reconnecting with their passion. People from all walks of life seeking inspiration, courage, or simply wanting to be in the presence of something real and true. Sister Margaret would sit at the old upright piano, her twisted hands resting on the keys, and speak briefly before playing. Her words were simple but profound, drawn from her journal, from her prayers, from the deep well of her lived experience. "Every time I sit at this piano," she said at one concert, "my hands hurt. The arthritis is worse than it was 2 years ago. Some days I can barely hold a cup of tea, but I keep playing because the music matters more than the pain. Your gifts, whatever they are, matter more than whatever obstacle stands in your way. Don't let fear or pain or time steal what's yours to share." Then she would play, sometimes the Chopin nocturne that had started everything, sometimes other pieces from her youth, sometimes simple hymns when her hands wouldn't cooperate with anything more complex. And every time people cried. Every single time. It wasn't just the beauty of the music, though it was beautiful. It was what the music represented. The triumph of the human spirit, the refusal to give up, the courage to be seen and heard despite our imperfections, the deep truth that we are more than our limitations, more than our age, more than our pain. After each concert, Sister Margaret would sit and talk with people. She would listen to their stories, their struggles, their dreams. She would hold their hands with her twisted ones and tell them it wasn't too late, whatever it was they wanted to do or be. She would pray with them if they asked. She would simply be present, offering the same grace that had been offered to her that night at the gala. The convent had been fully repaired with money raised from that original gala, donations that followed Sister Margaret's performance, and royalties from her book and the documentary. The crumbling roof was replaced, the faulty heating system upgraded, the cracking foundation reinforced. But more importantly, the convent had become a destination, a place of pilgrimage for people seeking hope and inspiration. Young women started inquiring about joining the convent after hearing Sister Margaret's story. They wanted to be part of a community that celebrated wholeness, that understood service didn't mean erasing yourself. The convent welcomed them, and Sister Margaret became an unofficial mentor to the newcomers, teaching them about faith and authenticity, prayer and self-expression. "Can you really have both?" a young novice asked Sister Margaret one afternoon. "Can you really serve God and still pursue your passions? Or is there always a sacrifice required?" Sister Margaret thought carefully before answering. "There's always sacrifice in any meaningful life, but I think I was wrong about what God was asking me to sacrifice. I thought He wanted me to give up music entirely. But maybe He just wanted me to surrender my attachment to fame and success. Maybe He wanted me to be willing to play for an audience of one, Him, or for no audience at all. Once I truly surrendered, once I was genuinely at peace with never performing again, that's when He gave the music back to me. Not as a career, but as a gift to share when and how He chose." The young novice nodded slowly. "So the sacrifice isn't the gift itself, but our control over how we use it?" "Exactly. When we hold our gifts with open hands, willing to use them or not use them as God directs, that's when they become truly powerful. That's when they become instruments of grace." As Sister Margaret's 87th birthday approached, her health began to decline more noticeably. She tired more easily. Walking even short distances became difficult. Her hands hurt almost constantly now, the arthritis progressing despite medication and therapy. Mother Superior and the other sisters worried about her, but Sister Margaret remained at peace. "I've lived a full life," she told them. "I've served God, loved people, and finally learned to share my gifts without fear. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it doing exactly what I'm doing, playing music, writing, connecting with people, living fully until the very end." For her birthday, the sisters organized a special concert. They cleaned and polished the recreation room. They brought in flowers. They invited everyone who had been touched by Sister Margaret's story. Rebecca, of course, who never missed a concert. The young violinist from the gala, now in college studying music. The filmmaker who made the documentary. Former students from her youth who had tracked her down. People who had traveled from other countries just to be there. Sister Margaret sat at the piano looking out at the crowd of faces, each one representing a connection, a story, a life touched by her courage. Her hands were shaking, the pain sharp today, but she smiled. "I want to thank all of you," she said, her voice soft but clear. 2 years ago, I played piano at a charity gala. I thought that would be the end of it. One performance, then back to my quiet life. But that night opened a door I didn't know was waiting for me. It led to all of this, to all of you, to a community built around the simple idea that it's never too late, we're never too broken. Our gifts always matter. You've given me more than I ever gave you. You've shown me that sharing ourselves, vulnerabilities and all, is the most powerful thing we can do." She turned to the piano, her hands finding the keys. For a moment she paused, deciding what to play. Then her fingers began to move and the opening notes of the Chopin Nocturne filled the room. The piece that had changed everything. The piece that had brought her back to herself. Her playing was slower than it had been 2 years ago. She missed more notes, had to pause occasionally when the pain became too sharp. But somehow the imperfections made it more beautiful, more human, more real. This wasn't a performance designed to impress. It was a gift, offered with trembling hands and an open heart. People in the audience were crying before she reached the second phrase. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition, of gratitude, of awe at witnessing something sacred. They were crying because they saw themselves in her. They saw their own buried dreams, their own hidden talents, their own courage to keep trying despite pain and limitation. When Sister Margaret finished, she sat for a moment with her hands resting on the keys. The room was completely silent. Then slowly one person began to clap, then another, then everyone, rising to their feet, applause mixing with tears, mixing with laughter, mixing with joy. Sister Margaret stood, gripping the piano for support, and looked at all these people. All these lives, all these stories, all connected by one simple truth. We are never too old, never too broken, never too anything to share our gifts with the world. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Sister Margaret wrote what would be her final journal entry. Today I am 87 years old. My body is failing, my hands barely work, but my heart is full.